So, thank you so much for joining the webinar today on the non-diet approach. I'm Anthony Hartcher. I'm a clinical nutritionist and lifestyle medicine specialist. So, a little bit about me before we get started, just so that you understand my background and the why I'm, I guess, a credible person to be talking to you on the subject matter today. Uh, didn't start out as a clinical nutritionist. It's been a journey of mine, but certainly in the end founded my passion I listened to my passion for health and wellness and pursued it. So it started out a chemical engineer, and it has served me to what I'm doing today, because engineering gives me that real pragmatic element to what I do. When I did my 8 years of study in health science, it was lots of theory, and the engineering has always helped me think about what's the relevance of this to the consumer or to the client. And I've always done that. And so today's webinar will certainly be me talking in more layman's terms and less of the science, but it has a science backing everything I share with you today. So now I'm very happy doing what I'm doing. I've left the corporate world and in living my dream, so to speak, as a clinical nutritionist and lifestyle medicine specialist. Done a degree in both nutrition and dietetic medicine, as well as a bachelor of complementary medicine. So enough about me, but you did see my family, my lovely family. So it's a big part of who I am. Certainly, I would consider myself a family man, a loving husband, and a proud father of two beautiful children. So here we go. Let's get into today's topic. And I've thought I'd put this slide up first because it sort of brings out the controversy, which is important to address. So there's a lot of misinformation, and you can Google a lot and get so many, hundreds of thousands, probably in the millions of sources of information. And however, it's very hard for the layperson to really work out what's credible and what's not. And this webinar, I hope, demystifies some of these preconceptions or any of these misconceptions that you have around diets and nutrition. So you can see here on the left of this slide, it says all diets work. And I agree with that. But I only conditionally or partially agree with it because, yes, all diets work in the short term, provided you're very compliant. Any diet will work in the short term, provided it really holds the principles of good eating. So, if you're adopting a diet for weight loss, then ultimately most diets will have that lower calorific value, more satiety, and generally you'll lose weight if you're consuming less calories than what you're expending. That's real simple. However, a lot of diets, and this is why I don't endorse diets and I endorse the non-diet approach, a lot of diets aren't sustainable. They pretty much are something you can do for a period of time, and then you get so sick of them, or they're just so hard to live a life, maintaining that level of strictness about it. So yes, diets will work in the short term, and you'll hear lots of your friends saying, yeah, I did this and it worked. I've lost, 5 kilos. And you're thinking, oh, maybe that's for me. And so people will yo-yo between jumping around from diet to diet to diet and never really get to something that they're happy with and that they can maintain for a lifetime. So what I'm sharing with you today are nutritional principles that you want to live by, that will serve you well and will give you longevity and happiness. It's not a diet, it's principles that to live by. So I wanted to really start with the mental side of things, because this is a big barrier for people to where they are today. So whether you're someone that is not happy with your current weight, or you're just feeling low on energy, or you're struggling with sleep, whatever it is, diet has a contributing factor to all those I mentioned and lots more because it's our fuel essentially. However, the reason why people struggle with what they eat is because there's so many influencing factors, and you probably you experience this basically every meal, or if not every day. And it's because we're so bombarded with, as I mentioned earlier, the media in terms of their one-liners and saying, "Oh, coffee's great," then the next day it's not, and same with wine, and it's the drop meat. If we get rid of meat, it's going to solve all our problems. Just go plant-based; it's the best. And you'll hear all this, and then you'll hear conflicting views of this, and it becomes a real source of stress. And I don't like food being a stress on anyone, hence why I have this non-diet approach. I'm sharing this diagram here in front of you because it's important that at the end of the day, long-lasting success will come with who you identify yourself as being. And ultimately, if you see yourself as someone who struggles, or with someone that's just heavy bones, or you've always carried weight, so that's always the way it's going to be, my mother told me that we're just big people, or whatever it may be, if you reinforce that message, you eventually identify yourself as that being true, and that self-identity really drives ongoing behavior. But the reverse is true as well. So you could, just through your actions, create an identity. And so, what I mean by that is, the actions you take will have some influence on how you identify yourself. And so the reason why I'm sharing this diagram is to really have a think about your habits, your behaviors, and where they come from, because that's really getting to the root cause of your struggles around eating, around dieting. And it may be hard to get to that underlying cause of that iceberg. However, there's certainly experts out there that can, help you identify what that may be. There's, I guess, those life coaches that study NLP, there's psychologists, there's plenty of people in this mental health space that could certainly help you identify that. By identifying it, then you can address what the driver is. I just really wanted to bring that up front because it's not entirely your fault. There are, there's environmental influences, there's influences from childhood, there's emotions from trauma that we carry with us. And eating can be one of those sources of comfort that we resort to when we're struggling. And comfort eating is very commonly seen in my clinical practice. And there's ways in which you can address that, and I'll certainly go through that towards the end of the presentation. But for now, I just wanted to leave you with some thinking around how you identify yourself. Do you identify yourself as a healthy person, or as a person that just struggles to lose weight and nothing works? Because that is going to be a significant difference to you moving forward. And you can change that self-identity by addressing it through actions. So I guess ultimately what I want you to take away from this presentation are the principles, and then put them to action. And that will help change the way you see yourself and how you identify yourself, which will then help you be able to maintain those great actions that you have now embarking on. So just some food for thought to begin the presentation. So what am I going to be covering in this presentation? It's very much these 4 principles that we're going to be talking about, starting with prioritization and preparation. As you know, if we fail to plan, we're planning for failure. And that is so important around nutrition. I see it time and time again. And I often hear this point of rejection, or a point of, I can't do this because I don't have the time. We all have time. It's just how we prioritize it that is the difference between someone that's healthy and someone that's not healthy, is the prioritization piece. And COVID has really helped health move up the priority ladder. And what I'm seeing now is actually a shift back to our old ways. And that's disturbing me. So I certainly want people to take the good aspects away around out of what they've learned from COVID into this, I guess, return to some more or some form of normalization. And those good aspects, if we really turn to our health when medicine didn't have the answer, we had to own our health. And yes, it's easy to say, oh, now medicine has found an answer, the vaccine. Hence, maybe I can take a little less cautious around my health. Well, I can assure you now that there'll be other viruses, new viruses, different strains, mutants of this virus that will rear its head in the future, and health will then be back in your hands, where medicine doesn't have the answer. So I always really want people to be proactive around their health and prioritize it. And I'm going to talk more about this principle in the coming slides. The other aspect around a key principle to success around the non-diet approach is adopting this more traditional view of food that we used to have. Today, food is labeled, just like medicine labels diseases. We've been learnt or taught or influenced by social media, advertising, to label food, which is really not helping us. It's not serving us whatsoever, this labeling of food. And what do I mean by labeling of food? It's essentially saying that, that's got calories, that's full of calories, can't have that. Or that's just full of fat, fat's bad for me. Oh, that's full of sugar, can't have that. That's really bad. And I'm even hearing today through this I quit sugar approach, or people that buy into that. Not that I'm endorsing excess amounts of sugar, but what you'll see is my next point is around moderation. But this I quit sugar movement has really soured people's view on fruit, and they see fruit as just sugar. Fruit is not just sugar. And this is really what I want you to start thinking about, is how you perceive food. What are you thinking about? When you go out for lunch, when you go through the menu, what sort of labels are you calling out to yourself about food? And hence you're moving on to something else. And then you get to think, out of all that menu, I can't have anything because this one's got too many calories. This one's fatty. This one I just don't like and I just can't eat. And then that choosing food, which is a privilege, you think in a developed world, it's an absolute privilege to be able to have this choice. And we often take that for granted, because in the undeveloped world, they don't have the same choice and they see food differently. And we really need to get away from this, picky, choosy labeling approach that, us Westerners have taken towards food, and get back to more those traditional roots that our grandparents, great grandparents, great great grandparents had towards food. And it was a very connected relationship. Today, we have a huge disassociation with food and a disconnectedness. And one of the driving forces around eating disorders is this disconnection from food and labeling it. And I'm strong, as you can see, I'm really honing in on this because I see it only causing health issues as a result of us labeling, disconnecting from food. And I really want to get back to the grassroots and this strong connection with food, and this, maintaining a love for food without labeling it and enjoying it with others. And that's what I mean by point number 2. And I'll even talk more to it. Point number 3 is around balance and moderation. And as I was saying, I'm not this I quit sugar movement. I don't buy into it because, again, it's labeling food, it's taking the joy away from eating food, and it's categorizing healthy foods as I can't have that because I quit sugar. So this is, again, comes back to that identity issue. If you identify yourself as someone, I quit sugar, you're going to take that into every day and essentially take actions around avoiding sugar, which is good to a certain degree and not so great to another degree. And hence why I don't like when people swing from one pendulum from one side to the other, which we often see. And I really see this a lot in Western world, is just constantly swinging from one side to the other and never finding that happy medium. So point number 3 is around finding the happy medium. So it's enjoying some sugar. It's not, it's not labeling it. It's enjoying it, accepting it for what it is, but enjoying it with moderation. Also, on this point, which I'm going to go into a bit more detail, is around this balancing. And this is a constant juggling act, right? So it's not something you just arrive at. It's the same with health, happiness. You don't just arrive one day, you're healthy. It's something you need to constantly work at. And it's the same with happiness. Happiness is just a state, and that state can be shocked, from the environment, from people around you, and you can be taken out of that state very quickly. It's the same with health. So what we want to do in order to maintain this long term, we need to see it as a dynamic state that we constantly work towards. So it's not something we just arrive and all of a sudden overnight we're healthy. Health is something that you work at for a lifetime. And it's the same with happiness. It's the same with love. It's the same with all this. You don't just fall in love and then maintain that love for a lifetime. It's something that you need to work at constantly in order to constantly deposit love into that relationship. And you can't just keep withdrawing. And it's the same with health. It's the same with happiness. We need to find this balance, and we need to understand it's not an endpoint. It's a constant dynamic state, and we need to work and help maintain the balance as it's in that fluid motion. So hence why I'm going to be covering this acid alkaline, which you may have come across this term, macro versus micro, and variety and color. So we'll be talking more to those points. And the fourth principle is around the energetic nature of food. So it's not labeling food from that negative point of view. It's seeing food for what it brings us around its energetic value. So it is, in a sense, categorizing it, and hence probably a bit of labeling. So I've got to come back a bit there. But it's from a healthy perspective, not an unhealthy perspective. And this digestion readiness of food ties into the energetic properties of that food. So I'll be talking more about that. And that last point does go back to that traditional mindful relationship. And you've probably seen with all these four principles, they're all interconnected. They can't stand alone. They need to be working together. So these principles they don't work in isolation, just like nothing else, like in terms of your health. Just focusing on your diet isn't going to create you being the healthiest person. It's you working on all aspects of your health. Hence why I'm a holistic health practitioner, because yes, diet's one aspect. It's only one aspect. And if we just focus on one side, one area of our health, then other areas will become neglected. So you could focus on your diet, but just let your sleep slip. But your sleep influences what you eat. It influences your ability to do exercise. It influences your moods. Everything's interconnected. So that's another important point to take away, that these four principles are interconnected and they need to work together, and you need focus in each of these areas. So let's get into these principles. So that first principle around prioritization and preparation, it is, stating or self-identifying that I am a healthy person and I'm going to take actions to reinforce this identity I have with myself. I identify myself as a healthy person, and I'm going to make choices and take actions as a result of being a healthy person. So what does a healthy person do? A healthy person puts aside the time. A healthy person, just like a great CEO or a great leader within any organization, or a great manager within an organization, or a great frontline person within an organization, what sets them apart is their preparation. Just like an Olympic athlete, just like any other athlete, it's that preparation. It's that preparation that sets you up for success. And it's the same around health. We need to put aside the time and not have this limiting belief that I don't have the time. Because if you want to be a healthy person, you have the time. If you want to remain unhealthy, then continue to believe that you don't have the time. And yes, you'll remain unhealthy. You won't make any progress towards your health because you believe that. A healthy person will say, I'm going to put aside the time because it's important to me. So it's planning your week. For example, it's looking ahead and looking what's coming up, looking at those days that are really busy and thinking, well, that's a big day coming up. I'm going to be late home, hence I'm not going to have much time to prepare food because the children are going to be hungry and I need to feed them. And so if you don't think ahead and look at your week ahead, then that night is going to become a takeaway night. However, if you think ahead and Sunday's a great day for preparing ahead. It's looking at your agenda, looking what you've got on, looking at the days that are super busy, thinking, well, I'm going to prepare a meal, put it in the freezer, or prepare a meal, put it in the fridge for that day so that when I get home, there's a lovely soup in the fridge that I can just heat up. There's a lovely, whether it be a casserole dish, a lasagna, there's a bolognese sauce, there's whatever it might be, it's prepared for that time when you don't have the time, essentially. So this is where the preparation really helps. And so I want you to start thinking ahead and really have Sunday afternoon as your preparation day for setting you up for success around what you eat. And the same can happen with breakfast. So people can wake up in the morning and be in a rush and they don't have time for breakfast. And so what happens is their blood sugar really drops and they get to work and they're thinking, well, they've probably had a coffee on the way to work as well. And it's driving this more need for glucose because everything's pushing you in the direction of not having it. So, for example, why I'm saying this, caffeine influences our cortisol, which is our stress hormone. If you haven't eaten and you're starving, then cortisol is going to be something that's released to help sustain you. That cortisol can increase that need for energy. And when we're stressed, we go for simple energy. And so that's where you get to work. I haven't eaten, I'm starving. I need something, and you buy that muffin because your brain it sees that it's high in glucose, and you're thinking, well, you've just eaten the muffin. You thought, well, I didn't really. That's something I shouldn't have eaten, but you've been corrupted by your brain because of the state you've been in. And this gets back to that other principle I mentioned around before, around this more traditional mindful relationship towards food. But I'm going to come back to that and show you the interconnection between what I just spoke about and that traditional relationship and that mindful eating. So getting back to the breakfast, so you can organize a breakfast, prep on Sunday. You can make a bircher muesli, you can make a chia pudding that you can have on those busy mornings that you don't have time for breakfast, that you can take to work and have at work. So you can start batching, and Sunday's a great day for batching breakfast, batching those dinners that you're going to be late home, batching lunches, for example. And I think that really helps with these time poor people is, when you're making a dinner, is actually make a little bit more for the next day. Or if you're not feeling that hungry at dinner, don't feel that you need to eat it all. You can put it aside, put it in the fridge and have it the next day. So this, I'm very much getting into the next principle as I'm talking, because, when we're eating mindfully, we don't just devour food. It hasn't had time to register in our body. And then we feel, I'm still hungry. We keep going back for seconds and thirds, and hence we overeat. But that's the next principle. I need to finish this principle. But so really, I think in summary, it's everyone has the time. It's a matter of priority. Put aside the time, dedicate a chunk of period of time on the Sunday towards shopping, towards food preparation. Set yourself up for success for the week, and always batch. I'm always looking at, if I'm making, I make a porridge for my kids, and the porridge isn't just oats, and I just heat up the oats and then add a bit of milk or whatever. The porridge I make for my kids is very comprehensive. It's got nuts, seeds, it's got, berries, goji berries. It's got cacao powder. So it takes time to make because I'm mixing all seeds and all these different ingredients. Excuse me. And so what I do is I actually batch make that. I just make up a big batch. And so then for the kids' breakfast, I want them to leave for school with, knowing that I've given them a wholesome breakfast that can really sustain them for the day, even if they forget to have recess or lunch or they're too busy or whatever. I know that that breakfast will carry them through the day. And so I batch make that. And so it's really important that you start thinking about this batching, putting putting aside the time to do this and make it a priority, because this is one of the key principles to ongoing success around nutrition and eating well. In terms of that traditional mindful relationship with food, which I've touched on a number of times, where it comes from is having this deep connection with food, is knowing that food nourishes us. It's not calories. It's not something that you should stress about. It's something that we should be very grateful that we have, and that we're grateful that we have such abundance and choice. And having that deep connection, that deep gratitude towards food, that thankfulness towards food, and seeing it as a point of connection with others and enjoying it with others is a fantastic traditional approach to food. And it serves this mindful relationship with food, and it serves you well in terms of not overeating. I mentioned binge eating earlier. You can avoid binge eating, comfort eating, if you have this real mindful approach to food and seeing it as this more traditional approach, is that it connects us, it brings us together, it's there to nourish us. It's not there to stress our lives. We've got enough stress in our life. We don't need food to be one of these stresses. So ditch the labeling, connect with it, see it for what it is, seeing it for its nourishment. And look, legumes, nuts and seeds, they're just not calories. There's so much more to those foods. And just if you connect with your microbiome, which is our gut health that you hear so much about, it's one of these popular topics that the media love. Our bacteria actually loves carbohydrates. It loves carbohydrates, I'd say, more than fats and proteins. And so when we're starving ourselves of carbohydrates because we see carbohydrates as just calories, we are affecting our gut health. And as you've heard, there's a strong relationship between our gut health and our brain, gut health and our blood sugar regulation, gut health and our heart health, gut health and our ability to detoxify. Our gut is a central point of, healing ourselves of disease. And if we don't look after our microbiome down there, microbiota is the correct term. So our microbiota, we're not giving ourselves the best step forward in terms of healthy outcomes. We know that poor gut health results in not great outcomes of health. And so in order to best look after our gut, we need a wide variety, which I'm going to get onto later on, of food, and that includes carbohydrates. And traditionally, if you look at traditional cultures, they had staples, and those staple foods, like you look at, those Mediterranean, they either had, bread or pasta. I look at the Asian cultures, they had rice. You look at them, again, in that sort of Middle Eastern area, it was couscous. Today, South America, it's quinoa, it's amaranth. So, all these grains, we have this approach that, you've probably heard of, I can't, shouldn't consume grains, because paleo and all this sort of stuff. Traditionally we did, and we can digest it, In saying that, it is important to understand where your genetics come from, because that does affect our ability to digest certain foods. So, for example, the Mexicans can digest corn, whereas outside of Mexican, if you don't have that bloodline, it's quite hard to digest corn, hence why you find it in your feces. And it's the same with other grains and things like that. If you really don't have those roots, then it's probably, if it doesn't sit well with you when you have it, it's probably you're just lacking the digestive enzymes to break it down. And your bloodline hasn't evolved to eat that particular food. So I do think about, when I'm talking, I always ask my clients, where their what their ancestry profile looks like, and then start to align their way of eating more to their ancestors, because our commensal bacteria, so it's what we were born with, and we have a reservoir of this commensal bacteria within us, is pretty much passed on from generation to generation from the mother. And that commensal bacteria will have an affinity to certain foods. And those certain foods will be those traditional foods. It's the same as the digestive enzymes. You'll have more of the digestive enzymes of your traditional types of food. The digestive enzymes will be plentiful to break down those traditional food groups. Whereas and this is what I see a lot of, is when people migrate to Australia, they, part of that migration requires some sort of assimilation, it's fitting in. And so I see these migrants go away from their traditional foods towards more Western foods. And it's generally that transition is where I see the health problems start setting in. So what I suggest you do is, if you have migrated to Australia and you've sort of gone more towards that Western way of eating, start progressing back towards your traditional way of eating, and you'll start to notice a huge difference in terms of the ability to digest food, your energy levels, in everything as a result of that, your sleep, your ability to exercise and move the body. So really think about that ancestry profile and start working towards eating more of those foods, because you'll find that they generally sit better. And this is where I want you to have this deep connection with what you're eating, and listen to your body, whether your body's saying, "Ugh, that's not sitting well." What was it that you had that's not sitting well? And there's probably a reason why it's not sitting well. It's either you've eaten too fast, which is quite common as well. You are eating in a stress state, which is very common. And I'm going to get to, actually, no, I cover it in this point, this mindfulness around eating. So it's, the second point. So connection with food, and then eating it mindfully. So when I say eating it mindfully, it's actually being present with the food you're having, as opposed to being disconnected. So what I mean by disconnected is that you're just eating and doing another task. That's disconnected. When you're present, you're doing one thing and one thing. And yes, people carry on about multitasking, but it's never, anything's never done to a great ability when you're multitasking. Your best outcomes will come from when you're focused and doing that sole task, that alone task. When you're truly present, you'll do your best work with that task. And so see eating as a task, and do that alone. I mean, alone in the sense, not doing other tasks. So, running around, getting the kids ready for school. If that's your morning regime, then you can create time by getting up a bit earlier, or you can say, well, I'm not going to eat in that stress state. I'm going to wait till I'm at work. I'm going to go into the kitchen and eat in the kitchen at work. Something like that. Just make sure that when you do eat, you're calm, you're not multitasking, and that is when you have this deep connection with how that food resonates with you. That is when the food will sit well, and that's when you will digest that food, as opposed to it just sitting there and feeling uncomfortable. It's probably because you've eaten in a stress state and you've eaten too quickly. So have that mindful relationship. Mindfulness can be brought about by being grateful for the food in front of you. We've really lacked this gratitude for food. We take it for granted, the food that we get and the great range of food, the great variety, the quality of food. If you've lived in other countries, you realize how lucky we've got it in Australia in terms of the variety of food. I've lived in Singapore, for example. Everything's imported, and so there's a long supply chain. A lot of the food's imported, and the fresh food isn't all that fresh because there's a long supply chain. We grow it here in Australia. We can get local produce, we can get fresh produce, and it's great quality. We should be grateful for that. We should give thanks for the food we have in front of us. That's important. And that's having a mindful relationship because you're acknowledging the food, you're seeing it for what it is, and you're connecting with it. So, this 2 points around, connecting with your food, being more mindful with your food will bring joy and satisfaction, and you'll feel happy with what you've eaten as opposed to self sabotaging thoughts of, I shouldn't have eaten that. You'll generally not eat well or make bad choices when you're stressed. Okay. So if you disconnect eating from a stressful state, so what I'm saying is get yourself in a resourceful state to eat. And you can do that through breathing exercises, eating in a park, eating away from your work. So, at lunchtime, going outside, going to a near park, going down side to a food court where other people are enjoying their food, enjoy it with others, connect with it. When you eat in that unstressed state, you'll digest it better. But at the same time, when you do some breathing exercises or become connected with like, yes, I need to have lunch. You want to get yourself in a resourceful state to receive lunch. So do something that brings you into that resourceful state. And that could be going to the park or just doing a little walk in nature or just a little walk before you eat, because that will get you in a state of mind where you'll make a better choice because you won't be as stressed. So exercise can de-stress us, nature can de-stress us, breathing exercises, meditation, all these great tools can de-stress us so that when our time comes to making a choice around food, we aren't operating in that stress state, because in that stress state, that's when you'll make these not so good choices because the body in stress wants instant energy, and instant energy is sugar. So you'll go for high calorific foods when you're stressed. There was a study done. It was more around sleep deprivation causing stress within the body, but sleep deprived individuals. So when you're sleep deprived, your stress hormones are aroused. So you are pretty much in a sleep deprived state, you are stressed. And these stress or sleep deprived people ate 300 more calories a day than those people that had a good night's sleep and weren't so stressed. So 300 calories per day, you add that up, that's, you can easily gain, I think over a working year, 300 calories per day will equate to 7 kilos. So if you're not addressing your sleep, if you're not addressing your stress, you can easily put on 7 kilos per year and continue that way if you don't address these causes, such as stress and sleep deprivation or stress excess. So I hope that principle serves you well. So remember, think about your ancestry, maybe start gravitating back towards your ancestry foods and eating them mindfully, and you'll experience so much joy and satisfaction around the foods. In terms of balance and moderation, so I touched on these earlier. So acid, alkaline. So acid foods are the ones that metabolize acidic. It's not taste, okay? So you've got to distinguish. So when people think acid, they're thinking tomatoes, they're thinking citrus fruits, they're thinking vinegar, they're thinking apple cider vinegar. All those I just mentioned are actually alkaline in terms of how they metabolize within the body. So when I'm thinking acid, alkaline, I'm thinking getting the balance right from a metabolites point of view. Why? Why am I thinking this? When we don't have this balance, it can be a source of inflammation for the body. Inflammation within the body causes dysregulation in the body. That can result in blood sugar dysregulation. When you have blood sugar dysregulation, that will influence your eating choices. And as I said, it'll be more those higher calorific choices, it'll be more those sugary choices. So in order to best manage your diet, or you need to adapt this eating principle around acid alkaline. So what does acid alkaline balance look like? I'm going to get to, but it's in the next slide. But essentially, acidic foods are protein foods and fatty foods. Okay, so think fats, protein, mainly acidic metabolites. Alkaline foods are your fruits and vegetables. And you probably already thought, well, you can see why in the Western world we have a predominantly acidic diet, because it's mostly protein, it's a lot of meat, excessive amounts of meat, and lots of fat, and not so many fruits and vegetables to balance that. So in terms of alkaline, you really want to have around half to 2/3 of your plate as alkaline food, so that's your vegetables, and about 1/3 acidic, so that's really your protein source, essentially. And some grains can be more on the acidic side of things because they contain proteins. So I guess your protein and your grains are sort of that 1/3 to 1/3 to up to a half, depending on what your goals are. If you're an athlete, then it does vary. If you're a weightlifter, for example, it varies again. But I'll show you a nice balanced plate on the next slide. And in terms of the next point, on terms of macros and micros. So macros are the foods we need in abundance. So that's your carbohydrates, which, is a fearful word in today. We disassociate with carbohydrates. So we do need carbohydrates, absolutely. We also need protein and we need fats. And that's what we need in high concentrations. What we need in low concentrations are our micros. And that's what we hear a lot of, is our vitamins and minerals. We need lots of that. And the reason why we focus so much on our micros is because we're not eating the right balance of macros. So if you get your macros right, you'll get your micros right. You won't need to think about your micros. The problem with the Western world is we have the macros so out of balance, we don't get the micros, hence why there's so much talk about supplementation. But my approach is get the macros right. You're addressing the root cause, you'll get the right amount of micros. So I'm going to show you on the next slide what this plate should look like as a general guide. Okay, it's going to vary depending on your goals and where you're at on your health journey. But as a generalization, it serves us well. And the last point here is variety and color. So as I mentioned before, we need a large variety of whole foods to really look after our gut health. That's the most important thing about gut health, is making sure you're eating a wide variety of whole foods. Okay, that's the most important thing. Don't need to worry about whether you're getting lactobacillus or bifidobacteria, or if you're getting any of these probiotic strains. If you eat a diet that's got good variety, lots of color, you're looking after your gut. And that includes carbohydrates, okay? Because macros are included in carbohydrates is a macro. Okay, I've been talking so much about this plate. So what should this plate look like? You've probably seen this before. The problem is we typically don't eat like this, and hence why I'm showing it again. So half the plate, at least half. You could even move this half of vegetables to 2/3 vegetables, okay? Particularly if you're sedentary, right? So if you're not sedentary, then you need to make sure you're getting enough carbohydrates to fuel you for your exercise goals, or to ensure that exercise session's beneficial, or to ensure you have the energy to operate. So, again, it's whole foods. So we've got our, our whole vegetables. We've got our whole grains, which is a quarter of the plate, and then we've got our really healthy sources of protein, which is like our fishes, because fish contains good fats, the polyunsaturated fats, the omega threes. Not condoning or not saying you shouldn't have meat. I think generally in the Western world, we eat too much of it. Yes, you should have some meat, absolutely, and a variety of meat. So when we have meat, we shouldn't have the same cut of meat. We shouldn't have the same type of meat. When I talk variety, have a wide variety of grains, a wide variety of vegetables, and a wide variety of meats. That's going to serve us well. It's when we just have one type of grain, a couple of vegetables that we like, and we're not exploring other vegetables. And when we're just having chicken all the time, because, red meat's not good for our heart. Well, excessive consumption of anything not great for us, right? If you just ate all vegetables, you're going to create nutritional deficiencies. And we see that in vegetarians and vegans, right? Because they are not having certain food groups. We need to have this whole approach, this wide variety, lots of color, as you can see on this plate, approach to what we eat. And then in terms of how much, well, how much is really influenced. You don't need to worry about how much if you eat mindfully. So when you eat mindfully, and I mentioned that's one of the key principles. So we're not stressed, we're connected with the food, and we're eating slowly. Eat slowly. That's when we're going to connect with our satiety signals. So you've probably realized this happens well when you fine dine, right? When you fine dine, you have not much at all, but the food's spread out over a long time period. You're enjoying it with others. You're connecting with the food. You're not thinking about work. And you find that you don't eat much, but you're satisfied. It's because you've eaten slowly, you've connected with the food, you've eaten mindfully, and you're registering the satiety signals. It's when we eat fast, stressed, we don't register the satiety signals, and we always feel hungry. So if you're constantly feeling hungry, it's either you're not having the right macro balance, you're not eating enough protein, enough fiber, or you could be depriving yourself of carbohydrates. Whatever it is, if you're, or you could be not drinking enough water, or simply you don't eat mindfully. It could be one of those things, or a number of those things, or a combination of those things is probably why you're feeling hungry. You shouldn't feel hungry all the time. And a little bit of hunger is okay. Okay. We always think we need to satisfy that hunger signal. We need to address it straight away. We don't. We're designed to be able to operate feeling a bit hungry. Okay. So, and this is where intermittent fasting comes into play. We are actually designed to have periods of fasting or breaks between meals. We're not designed to consume all day, every day. We're designed to have a meal, a solid break, another meal to really to rest the digestive function, to allow the digestive function to recover, recuperate, regenerate. If we're constantly eating, then we're not. We don't allow the repair to happen. And you probably heard of leaky gut, and these sort of things can arise. Leaky gut's not the right technical term, but you've probably heard it being shared by social media or shared by the media. But anyway, it's where our gut permeability is heightened or it's increased as a result of inflammation. Inflammation can reside from many factors, but anyway, I digress. So really focus on getting the right balance of macros, doing something like this plate for every meal. And look, some meals might be out of balance, but what it is saying, well, like for breakfast, for example, if breakfast was predominantly protein, or, like a couple of eggs and not many vegetables, maybe a piece of toast. So maybe you address the right-hand side of this slide, such as you've got enough protein, you've addressed your grains, but you skipped out a bit on your vegetables. That's okay. Don't stress over that. what you want to do then is then think, well, lunch, I'm going to have predominantly vegetables. Okay. Um, and sort of get the balance back. And so it's, as I say, it's always work in progress. It's nothing to be stressed about. It's just thinking, well, if I've had a meal that was low in vegetables, or I'm a bit behind on my vegetable uptake for the day, then catch up. And maybe dinner. You want dinner to be predominantly vegetables, and less grains or less carbohydrates, because you're going to sleep. You don't need the energy. So and that, again, for breakfast is when at the start of the day is when you need your energy. So I can understand why you might want to have predominantly your grains in the morning with protein, to really help kickstart your day. And then lunch, you might want to have a lighter meal, and that could be a salad, and that hence is ticking, getting your vegetables up, and you're getting the balance that way. So it doesn't need to be strictly this, right? It's just thinking, at the end of the day, if I look at my eating as a whole, did I, if I combined all my meals, did I roughly get around 50% vegetables, about 25% carbohydrates, and 25% protein? If you did as a collective, that's great. If you didn't, well, it's not the end of the world. You can address it tomorrow. So don't go through this sabotage saying, I ate crap today and I just can't do this. And we all have our not so great days, or the days where we gravitate towards our comfort foods or whatever it is. The most important thing about health is getting back on the bandwagon, is just correcting ourselves. We all stumble, we make mistakes. That's human. That's human nature. We have moods that are down, we have moods that are up. It's cyclic, right? There's ups and downs in every aspect, ups and downs. Even the best people, in terms of their nutrition, have good days, bad days. That's human, right? That's us being human. We are not robots. So if you have a bad day, just get back on track the next day. Okay. And as I said, don't stress about having to nail this plate every meal. Yes, I don't nail this plate every meal, but I generally, throughout the day, I'll get that balance back. Okay. And, you know, what I'm wanting to achieve ultimately every day is over 5 serves of vegetables, over 2 serves of fruit. I want to get, for me, and again, this is different from everyone. So I do a fair bit of weight work, gym work. So therefore, my protein intake needs to be a bit higher than someone that's not doing the same amount of gym work. Same with my grains. I do a lot of exercise. I'm competing in sport. So yes, my carbohydrates probably a bit higher than other people, and this is why nutrition ultimately needs to be tailored to your needs. But you can do that as well if you want to be, do it yourself sort of approach towards it. Absolutely. This webinar will help serve you in terms of getting the nutritional principles right, and then you just tweak it over time. You might want to just focus on a particular area that I've spoken about today and really embed that. So maybe it's just focusing on the macros or micros, or maybe you just want to focus on that preparation and prioritization. And then once you feel like you've mastered that preparation and prioritization, that, Sundays, yep, is your meal prep day, you're doing it, then maybe look at one of the other principles and then start addressing that. And then eventually you'll get all 4 principles nailed, and they'll become habit. So here's some example of what macros are and micros. You can read through this quicker than me, but the carbohydrates, again, just focus on whole. Okay, whole carbohydrates. So we're looking at our whole grains, our legumes, right? Is a great source of carbohydrates. Again, nuts and seeds also contain some carbohydrates, about a third. So nothing's perfect. So nothing generally is all fat or all protein or all carbohydrates. There's generally a mix of these. So what I'm saying is that grains are probably more predominantly, depending on the grain, is more predominantly a carbohydrate. Legumes also contain protein, also contain some fats, right? So it's not just one or the other. Hence why I don't like labeling, because we're missing the point. That food will generally contain a mix of micros, but it will be predominant in one. and hence why I've sort of labeled it as I have on this slide as it is. And then if you get that macro portion right, then the micros will fall into place. And in terms of the micros, same with the macros, really, it's whole foods, lean foods, and green. So green is, plant-based. Why I'm emphasizing plant-based foods is because as Westerners, we don't eat enough, right? I'm not saying go 100% plant-based. I don't endorse 100% plant-based. I think it's dangerous in terms of creating nutritional deficiencies and poorer health outcomes. Yes, it might serve you initially, but you can do anything for a period of time. You can do the ketone diet for a period of time. You can do veganism for a period of time, but then you got to transition to these principles of eating and not isolating yourself into only eating vegan foods, only eating ketone rich foods, only eating the Atkins approach, which is high fats, high protein, low carbohydrates. Yes, it will serve you for a period of time. Longer term, it will create problems health wise. The last principle here, you can see that I think the diagram speaks to it well in terms of, it's that rainbow looking salad, the rainbow looking stir fry is, variety in color. So, but as I mentioned before, lots of variety in color, also in your meats and types of meats and different parts of meats. A good example here is the Inuit population, so formerly known as the Eskimos. They don't have a lot of green, right? It's frozen. Everything's frozen. There's not much vegetation growing. And there's seaweed. Obviously, there's a bit of seaweed, but so they have, like you'd say, a very predominant sort of meat or animal based diet. However, when they consume the animal, this is what's different between them and the Western world. When they consume the animal, they consume the entire animal. We don't do that today. Yes, in certain cultures, they still do, such as the Chinese, eat most of the animal, if not all of it. And this traditional way of eating really served them because they ate the kidneys, they ate the liver, and certain vitamins and minerals are stored in those. So, like you think about the seal, right? The Inuits ate seal. Seal feed on seaweed, right, and plankton and fish and other, but they ate the whole seal. So, the seal would have been storing certain vitamins in the liver because we store certain vitamins in the liver, such as B12. Okay, so and other minerals would have been stored in certain organs, in certain parts of the body, in tissues, and for example, and we don't do this in the Western world. We just eat the thigh, we just eat the leg. We're not eating these different organs, and hence why we can't consume a carnivore diet in the Western way, because we are going to create nutritional deficiencies. Yes, traditionally they were able to do it, but they consume the whole animal. And yeah, I think that's pretty much what I wanted to cover. I've really gone for the hour. But just in a conclusion of this webinar, don't lose sight of the whole picture in just focusing on addressing your nutrition, right? Yes, I shared nutritional principles, but it's important that we look at health holistically. I mentioned this at the earlier, start of the webinar. Was, when we look at health holistically and we're working in each of the key areas of holistic health, that's when ultimate health success will come, because they're all interconnected. Just as I said, all the nutritional principles are interconnected. Same with holistic health. It's all interconnected. As I said before, impaired sleep will affect what you eat the next day in terms of the amount of calories. The types of food you eat will be affected by sleep. Your ability to exercise will be affected by sleep. Your exercise affects your ability to sleep. Your nutrition affects your ability to sleep. They're all interconnected. Our relationships are affected by sleep, are affected by what we eat, are affected by, or influenced. Influence is probably a better term. Influenced by exercise. It's all interconnected, and I think you've probably gathered that point. So ultimately, we're looking for not swinging the pendulum so that, you're just doing these nutritional principles and not addressing, movement, and not addressing your sleep, and not addressing relationships. Need to be working on all these different parts together. Yes, for a period of time, you can focus on an area just to get that habitual. I suggest that. I actually endorse that. It can really serve you. But ultimately, once you have that area habitual, it's become habit, such as living these nutritional principles, then start addressing another area. Start getting more movement into your day. Start working on your sleep hygiene. So don't lose sight of the bigger picture. Please don't. Make sure you do. And I'd love you to connect with me in any of these forums, whether it be social media. Follow me. I share lots of useful tips, lots of free information. There's lots of other webinars. I have webinars on sleep on my website, webinars on, I share what you find on my website, you'll pretty much find on my Facebook page in terms of the webinar content. Also on my website is all my podcasts. I'm a podcaster. You can look up me and my health up is my podcast channel. I've done over 50 episodes where where I've spoken, interviewed experts in holistic health, or aspects of holistic health. And so there's lots of great information in my podcast, lots of free webinars that you can see on, in terms of these resources that I'm showing you here. There's lots of self-help information. So embrace it. And I hope you enjoyed today's webinar. What I'm going to do now is stop the recording so that you can ask questions freely. So I'm just going to hit